I met Malcolm on the worst possible kind of day, the kind where everything around you is loud and impatient, and your body feels like it's been set on vibrate. The airport had the familiar smell of coffee that had been reheated too many times and carpet that never quite recovered from years of shoes. Screens scrolled numbers and delays in confident fonts, like the terminal could bully the airline into being punctual. I'd arrived with a plan and the kind of careful excitement that comes from telling yourself you're in control. I would get through the delay. I would call my sister back. I would board on time. And by morning, I'd be in a new apartment with new light. I'd repeated those sentences in my head in the cab. The truth was simpler. I was trying to outrun a feeling. I was trying to outrun myself. My phone had dropped to 12% right as I found my gate. I hovered over the charging stations, watching a cluster of people pretend not to watch each other. There was no room by the wall outlets, only a narrow strip by the seats that held a small spill of cords and power bricks, the kind of setup you could lose a toe to. I stood there too long, staring at my own reflection in the black glass of a kiosk. My battery icon kept shrinking like a countdown to something humiliating. "Do you have yours with you?" a voice asked behind me. I turned and saw Malcolm. He looked like he belonged to the kind of life that was always in motion, not sloppy, not rushed, just ready. His hair was salt and pepper and closely cropped, and he wore a dark jacket that had been through weather. He held a phone charger and a compact power brick like he'd brought them for a reason he didn't expect. I should have said, "It's fine, thanks, I'll figure it out." I should have kept the conversation as small as possible because small conversations were safe. Instead, I heard myself say, "It's almost dead." Malcolm's expression didn't change much, but his eyes did. An immediate adjustment, like his attention had locked in on mine. He tilted his chin toward the seat beside him. "Sit, plug in. You'll get a message out at least." I hesitated. Not because I didn't need it, because needing things from strangers made me feel exposed, like someone could see the parts of me I kept hidden even from myself. "Okay," I said, and my voice sounded too thin even to me. He angled his power brick toward the outlet strip. I sat, careful to leave space between us like we were strangers with polite rules. He held the charging cable with a deliberate looseness, making it look effortless. When I plugged my phone in, I watched the battery icon jump from 12 to 14 like it had been starving. A minute later, my screen lit with a notification. My sister had texted asking if I landed. I stared at it, fingers hovering. Malcolm glanced toward my phone. "You can call when you've got enough." "I will," I said, but I didn't press the call button yet. I didn't want my sister's voice to anchor me in the wrong timeline, like landing, like moving forward, like being the person I told everyone I was. Malcolm settled back with a sigh that sounded half relief, half fatigue. He didn't try to fill the space. That was what surprised me most. People always tried to fill empty air. He didn't. He let the delay be the delay. After a while, I asked, "What gate are you headed to?" He told me. He spoke like someone giving directions, straightforward, no excess. He was traveling for a work contract. He had a way of saying details that made them sound unimportant, even though I could tell he'd learned to make everything unimportant to survive it. I told him my destination too, and then I regretted it immediately. Names of places were easy. But the moment you say them, you're admitting you're on your way somewhere with a before and after. My before and after had been getting smaller for years. The terminal kept buzzing. Announcements crackled about weather patterns and rebooking assistance and "please be patient." The words washed over me while I kept my phone plugged in and pretended the warm hum of shared power didn't matter. At some point, Malcolm stood to stretch. When he did, I caught a glimpse of his right forearm. The notch scar looked like it had healed badly at some point, like a story he'd decided not to tell. I turned my eyes away quickly, embarrassed by the speed of my curiosity. When he sat back down, he didn't notice. Or maybe he did and chose not to react. Either way, the choice felt deliberate. We talked in fragments after that. What we'd done before coming to the airport, what we were trying to avoid thinking about, the kind of jokes people use to keep their hands from shaking. The delay lengthened. The airline app kept changing the boarding time like it couldn't decide whether to take us seriously. People around us started losing their softness. You could see it in shoulders, in the way people stared too hard at the screens. Malcolm's phone was already on low battery when he checked it. He didn't complain. He simply turned his screen face down and watched the gate agent with the resignation of someone who'd practiced disappointment. It should have been the end of my attention. I should have returned to my own anxiety and saved my energy for when I needed it. But I kept watching his hands. He had a calm, careful way of holding everything, his charger, his coffee, his ticket, like he was always trying not to drop the most fragile thing in his life. At around hour 2 of delay, he asked, "What's keeping you up tonight?" I laughed too quickly. "The delay." He didn't laugh back. He looked at me the way you look at a page you've read before, like he knew there was more under it. I forced another joke. "I'm just excited to be somewhere else." Malcolm nodded like he'd heard what I wanted him to hear. Then he shifted his gaze past me, toward the huge windows where the sky was the color of wet steel. "Sometimes being somewhere else doesn't fix anything," he said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant as a warning. It was just true. My throat tightened. I picked at the seam of my jacket sleeve and wondered why the truth was suddenly louder. Why he was suddenly easier to talk to than the people who had known me for years. "Are you always this thoughtful?" I asked. He considered that. Not on purpose. That answer should have been a dead end. Instead, it felt like a door closing softly instead of slamming. I felt safe enough to step closer, then immediately backed away because safety wasn't my habit. I told myself we were just two men stuck in an airport. I told myself it didn't matter. But when the gate call finally happened, an announcement that sounded like an apology disguised as good news, people stood with sudden urgency. Malcolm stood too, and for a second our shoulders bumped. It was barely contact, but it left heat in the space between us like proof. We joined the line. We moved forward, the way crowds moved, shoulders angled, eyes searching for seats, hands clutching documents like lifelines. Boarding was messy. Seats didn't match tickets. People argued politely. Someone spilled a cup of water and apologized too many times. When we found our row, same section, different sides, I slid into my seat and tucked my bag under the armrest. Malcolm took his spot across the aisle. The flight attendants moved like time was a fragile thing. The cabin lights dimmed. I watched Malcolm settle, saw him take out his headphones, then put them back without pressing play. Something about him stayed present. I pulled out my phone to distract myself. I didn't mean to. My thumb hovered over my sister's thread again. I had already called her once. She'd asked what I was doing, where I was staying, if I was eating. I'd answered with the correct words. Then I'd ended the call too quickly. The second my phone screen dimmed, Malcolm's gaze met mine across the aisle. I looked away first. Of course I did. We didn't talk during takeoff, but the whole time I could feel the outline of his attention like a second gravity. When the plane leveled off, I opened my notes app and started typing an address I didn't need. A habit from before I admitted to myself I was lonely. After an hour, the light above the aisle flickered and someone down the row laughed. The sound was brief and bright. Malcolm reached into his pocket and pulled out a small packet, nuts maybe, or a snack. He held it between two fingers, then paused as if he was deciding whether to offer it. He tapped the armrest with the back of his knuckles, one small gesture. I looked up. He passed it across the aisle with a careful motion. "You want it?" My first instinct was to refuse. Not because I didn't want the snack, but because accepting care felt like committing to something. "I'm okay," I started. Then his eyes held steady. "You looked like you didn't eat." I swallowed. The delay had messed with my appetite. That was true. He'd noticed. I took the snack. "Thank you." His mouth softened. It wasn't a smile exactly, more like relief that my hands had accepted what his hands were offering. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He didn't flirt. He didn't act like I owed him. That was the dangerous part. Because the longer you're around someone who doesn't demand anything, the more you begin to believe you don't have to hide. In the air, the city lights below thinned. The cabin got quieter. I closed my eyes, then opened them again because sleep felt like a betrayal of the moment. When the plane finally landed, my heart thumped like it had been waiting under my ribs. People stood quickly, bags jammed in overhead bins. Malcolm moved with that same controlled readiness. We stepped into the terminal together and separated gently, like we didn't know what to do with closeness. At the baggage carousel, I checked my phone. Malcolm did too, but I caught his eyes lifting toward mine every few seconds, like he was waiting for a sign. I didn't know what sign I could give. My phone buzzed again, my sister texting. The thread was full of her plans, her questions, her insistence that I was fine. I watched Malcolm's charger cable disappear back into his bag. Then he pulled his phone out, glanced at it, and held it up slightly. Not quite a gesture, not quite a question. "Do you have a contact," he asked, "for emergencies, in case you get stuck again?" My lungs felt too small. The wording was practical, but the subtext was the opposite of practical. I heard myself answer, "I have an app for that." He blinked, processing. Then he said, "Okay, but your number, so I can find you." The sentence landed like a hand on my chest. Not heavy, just undeniable. I should have said no. I should have made it about logistics and then walked away. But something in me, some stubborn, terrified part that wanted to believe I could be known, reached forward. I opened my contacts, handed him my phone, and let him type his number into a new contact. Our fingers brushed for half a second. It left a spark I felt even when I blinked. He saved it as M, just the first initial, like we were both trying not to make it real too quickly. "Okay," he said. "Text me when you get to your place." I nodded. "You too." He didn't correct me. He didn't say he wasn't going anywhere from the words. He just looked at me like he was storing them. Outside the terminal, the air changed. A different kind of wind met us. Cars moved in a slow stream. The sky was wide and pale. We walked to the pickup area. Our paths weren't the same. He would go to his hotel. I would take a ride to my new apartment. For a while, we just walked beside each other, shoulder to shoulder, pretending the side-by-side meant nothing. Then we reached the curb. A driver called out names. People shifted into their assigned realities. Malcolm turned toward me. His expression was careful. "I know it's—" He paused. The pause mattered. It showed he wasn't reading a script. "I know it's not—" He tried again and stopped. My chest tightened with an almost panic. Here it was, the moment where honesty either becomes a bridge or a wound. I didn't want to be the kind of man who ran, but I also didn't want to be the kind who jumped. "Malcolm," I said, and my voice cracked on his name. "I don't know what you're doing." He watched me, stunned by my own lack of control. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm sitting here thinking you offered a charger to a stranger," I said, and I hated how emotional I sounded. "And then you asked for my number like you were going to come back." His eyes held mine. There was no anger in him, no defense. "I wanted to," he said simply. Just those words. Wanting. Not demanding, not insisting. Wanting. My hands curled into fists and then loosened again. I could feel my own self-protection trying to rise like a wall. But the wall was tired. It had been standing too long. "I wanted to be ignored," I admitted under my breath before I could stop myself. Malcolm's brows lifted. "Ignored?" I swallowed. "Not ignored like you did something wrong," I shook my head. "Ignored like, if I didn't acknowledge it, maybe I'd be safer. Maybe I'd make it just a delay." The word delay sounded ridiculous in my mouth, like we were trying to make a life out of one long day. He didn't laugh. He stepped closer, not enough to trap me, just enough to say he'd heard me. "We can make it something else," he said. The courage in his voice made me flinch, because if he meant that, then I had to decide whether I meant anything at all. I turned my face toward the street. toward the chaos of cars and strangers and the easy motion of everyone else's lives. "I don't do this," I said. "What, staying?" he asked. My throat tightened. "Honestly," I said, "I don't do honesty first." Malcolm nodded like he understood. Then he exhaled slowly. "Then start with something small." My gaze snapped back to him. "Like what?" "Like telling me you got home safely," he said. "And then we'll see what the next small thing is." Something about the simplicity made my eyes sting, because I'd spent so long believing love had to arrive in a grand gesture, a confession in a dramatic location. But Malcolm was offering something else, a series of small truths. I looked at him and forced myself not to blink too quickly. "Okay," I said. "I can do that." His shoulders loosened. "Okay." We didn't hug. We weren't ready to touch what we wanted. Instead, we did something more vulnerable. We held each other's gaze as the driver's car pulled up for me. He stepped back first, giving me room, and I hated that my heart loved the restraint. I got into the car. The window closed. The world outside kept moving, but my chest didn't. That night, I unpacked boxes in my new apartment while my phone rested on the counter like it might burn. The room was bright in an ordinary way. White walls, a cheap lamp, the smell of cardboard. I kept checking the time instead of calling my sister back. When she texted again asking if I was okay, I typed, "I'm okay," then deleted it. I typed, "I'm scared," then deleted that too. Finally, I sent a text to Malcolm. "I made it. All good." I stared at the message for a long time after I hit send, as if watching it would change it. Minutes passed. Then my phone buzzed. Malcolm replied, "Good. I'm glad. Did you eat?" My throat tightened so hard I had to set the phone down. I went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stared at shelves full of nothing yet. I grabbed a sandwich from the only delivery I'd ordered in advance and ate it slowly like I could stretch the moment out. Over the next week, we texted in small bursts. He didn't flood me with affection. He didn't send late-night poems or ask for pictures of sunsets. He asked questions about work, about the neighborhood I lived in, about the way the airport had smelled. He told me he'd been stuck in that same terminal before. He never talked about why he always ended up traveling on days that went wrong. I never asked. We were both too good at pretending we were casual. But the pattern was clear in my body. I waited for his messages without realizing I was waiting. On day 10, he asked, "Are you free this weekend?" My heart leapt, then immediately sank. Free. Weekend. Options. "Maybe," I typed, then deleted it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard like they were learning how to be brave. I wrote, "If you don't mind it being awkward." He responded fast enough to make me suspicious of my own hope. "Awkward is fine," he wrote. "I've practiced awkward." I should have laughed. Instead, I sat on my couch and stared at the floor while my mind spun explanations and excuses and plans for how to be safe. I tried to tell myself it was just coffee, just meeting, just time. But I knew my body wasn't fooled anymore. When Saturday came, I wore a shirt that looked normal, the kind of normal that still felt like costume. I met Malcolm in a cafe near my apartment. The place was bright and full of people pretending they were alone. I saw him walking in from the window. He paused when he spotted me like he was checking whether I'd actually shown up. When he came to my table, he didn't sit right away. He stood for a second and looked at me like I was real. "You came," he said. I nodded too quickly. "You did too." He sat across from me and placed his hands on the table. The scar on his forearm disappeared under his sleeve, but I'd already memorized it. We talked about everything and nothing. We talked about how long delays could swallow a day. We joked about the airport's coffee being legally defined as brown. But beneath the jokes, something kept tightening. Malcolm asked, "Do you ever think about that day?" I swallowed. All the time. He didn't look away. Me too. My breath caught. I realized we were both waiting for permission to move closer. Instead of asking, we asked other questions. We stayed polite. We pretended we weren't leaning toward something dangerous. Then, almost by accident, Malcolm asked, Are you seeing anyone? There it was. The question that pretends to be about romance while actually being about safety. I had said I was fine so many times that fine was automatic. My brain reached for it instantly. I could have said no, and I could have made it clean. But I didn't want clean. I wanted honest. I stared at my cup and felt my own fear rise. Honesty would change what happened next. It would make the air between us heavier. I've been pretending, I admitted, and my voice sounded smaller than I intended. Malcolm's eyes widened just a fraction. Pretending what? He asked. That I don't want what I want, I said. Silence settled like dust. I realized I'd said too much. I realized he could decide to walk away and I couldn't blame him. I realized this could be the moment the story turned into something I couldn't stand. Malcolm didn't flinch. Instead, he exhaled slowly like he'd been holding his breath too. Thank you for saying it, he said. My pulse thumped in my ears. Are you thanking me? He nodded. Because I've been pretending too. I stared at him so hard I forgot how to blink. What have you been pretending? Malcolm's jaw tightened. His fingers moved to pick at the edge of his napkin, then stopped. He looked like he was searching for a way to be gentle without lying. I've been acting like I'm just someone who offers chargers, he said. Like I don't look at you and think I could be brave. Like I don't want to be... He stopped. His eyes glistened and he looked angry at his own vulnerability. He tried again. I want to be in your life, not as a convenience. My chest ached. It hurt in a way that felt like relief and fear sharing the same room. I looked down at my hands. I'd been so careful not to reach. I realized my care had become its own kind of cage. I don't know how to do this without ruining it, I whispered. Malcolm's gaze softened. Then don't ruin it. Tell me when you're scared. It was such a simple instruction. It made my fear feel workable. I swallowed. I'm scared right now, I said. Malcolm nodded, not as if it was a problem to solve, but as if it was information he could hold. Then we hold it together. Over the next weeks, we didn't accelerate into some perfect romance. We built something messy and real. We met after work for short walks. We sat in parks while the city blurred around us. Malcolm always chose seats where the light hit our faces evenly, like he didn't want one of us to hide in shadow. When my sister called, I learned how hard it was to speak normally while my phone rested in my palm. I learned how easy it was to lie even when I hated lying. Sometimes I'd catch Malcolm watching the way I answered. He didn't ask, "How is it with her?" He didn't pry. He just waited until I could speak. I started to understand that honesty didn't happen all at once. It happened in tiny permissions we gave each other. And then, one evening, my phone buzzed with an email. The subject line looked routine. The content wasn't. My new lease approval had fallen through. The apartment complex had a mistake, and my deposit was being questioned. I stared at the screen like it might rearrange itself into something kinder. My throat went dry. I called the leasing office. The person on the other end spoke with the calm cruelty of rules. They said I needed documents. They said I needed proof. They said I might have to reapply. I hung up and stood in my kitchen without moving. My whole plan had been built on the belief that new beginnings were possible if I worked hard enough. Now it looked like my world was slipping again. Malcolm was texting me that night. It was ordinary. He'd asked how my day went. I typed a reply and then erased it. The words refused to become fine. Finally, I wrote, "Can I tell you something and you won't think I'm dramatic?" He answered immediately. "Tell me." I called him. My voice shook. "They think my deposit was wrong," I said. "The lease might not go through." Malcolm didn't say, "Everything will be okay." He said, "Okay, I hear you. What do you need?" My eyes burned. "I don't know. I need to not panic." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "We can panic later." I let out a laugh that sounded like crying. After the call, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my hands like they belonged to someone else. I felt stupid for not seeing this coming. I felt like my life had always been a rehearsal for disappointment. Malcolm showed up at my apartment an hour later. Not because I had asked, because he had found a way to arrive without making it a transaction. I opened the door and saw him standing there with a takeout bag in one hand and his other sleeve pushed up to reveal that scar. "What are you doing here?" I asked, too loud. He looked at me like he'd been there inside the fear long enough to know what it cost. "I told you," he said. "You can tell me something and I won't think you're dramatic." I stepped back instinctively, preparing to hide. He paused. His eyes flicked over my face, then away like he was giving me room to breathe. "I brought food," he added, like that was the simplest possible offering. I stared at the takeout bag. "How did you even—" He shrugged once. "I know where you live." The way he said it wasn't creepy. It was careful. It was the kind of truth that made you realize you'd been letting people into your life without noticing. And this time, someone had actually followed you with care. I let him in. We ate on the floor, our knees almost touching. We talked about documents and possibilities and the way the leasing office treated people like numbers. Malcolm listened without trying to fix. When we ran out of things to say, he cleared his throat. "I'm going to be honest," he said. My heart tightened. "Okay." "I'm scared too," he admitted. "I'm scared if I tell you exactly what I want, you'll realize you can't give it. Or you'll decide you don't want it with me because of what it would cost you." The word cost hit me hard. I thought about my sister. I thought about the assumptions I'd been living inside. I thought about my job, my coworkers, my old friends who thought they knew my life. I thought about how much courage it takes to be honest and how little control you have once you start. "I don't want to lose you," I said, and it was the first time I'd said it out loud like that without hiding behind sarcasm. Malcolm's eyes widened. "Then don't lose me," he said. I shook my head, overwhelmed. "I mean, I don't know what you are asking me for." Malcolm leaned forward slightly. "I'm asking if you'll keep choosing me, not as a maybe, as a real decision." My throat tightened. "And what are you asking me to decide?" He looked down at our hands, then back up at my face. "That you can want me without pretending you don't." My breath stuttered. This was the part where someone usually ran. Where someone usually said, "It's not that simple." But Malcolm's honesty made my excuses feel ugly. I swallowed. "I've been pretending," I said again, like repetition could make the truth easier. "I've been telling myself that if I act normal, I can keep my life intact. But the longer I do it, the more I lose myself." Malcolm nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now," I said, "I don't want to lose myself for the sake of being acceptable." My voice broke on the last word. Malcolm reached across the floor and took my hand. His fingers were warm. He didn't squeeze like he was claiming me. He held like he was asking permission without words. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my thumb trace the edge of his knuckles. I felt the scar tissue on his hand, the evidence of a past he carried quietly. He exhaled. "Thank you," he whispered. For a while, we sat that way, our hands connected on the floor like it was the most natural position in the world. Later, when my lease paperwork finally stabilized and the apartment complex agreed to correct their error, I realized the stress had been a test. Not of the airline delay, not of fate, of us. Would we hide when it mattered, or would we tell the truth when fear rose? In the weeks that followed, we had a night that felt like an answer. Not fireworks, just a clean, quiet certainty. We ended up walking in the dark along a river near my apartment. The city lights reflected in the water like thin threads. Malcolm kept his hands in his pockets until we reached a bench. When he sat, he said, "Can I ask you something without you spiraling?" I let out a breath. "Try me." He turned toward me. "Are you happy?" My chest tightened. I remembered a different life where I lied automatically. I remembered how people asked, "Are you okay?" and how I had learned to answer yes. But with Malcolm, the truth felt like a path I could walk, not a cliff I had to jump. "I'm scared," I said honestly, "but I'm happy too. Not the kind of happy where nothing hurts, the kind where I can't pretend it doesn't." Malcolm's eyes glistened and he smiled, this time fully. "That's the kind I want," he said. We sat in the quiet until his voice softened. "When we first met, I thought I was being kind," he admitted. "I didn't realize I was choosing." I swallowed. "I thought I was being careful." "And you were," he said. "But I'm done being careful in a way that hurts me," I continued. "I want to be honest even if it changes things." Malcolm nodded. "Then be honest with me tonight. Tell me what you want." My heart pounded. The night felt too ordinary for the seriousness of the question, but I didn't want to keep postponing the moment where I became someone I could respect. I leaned closer and spoke quietly, like the river might carry it away if I was too loud. "I want you," I said. No dramatic explanation, no metaphor, no delay to hide behind. Malcolm stared at me, stunned into stillness. Then he reached out and cupped my cheek, his thumb brushing my skin like he was memorizing it. "I want you too," he said. The words landed differently than the ones we'd said earlier. They were the same words, but this time they weren't afraid. We didn't rush. We didn't make promises we couldn't keep. We just let the truth exist between us, steady and warm. Later, when I walked him to his hotel, he paused at the lobby entrance. A security guard glanced at us, then away, the way strangers often do when something tender is happening out of the corner of their eye. Malcolm looked at me like he was about to say something that could split his life open. Instead, he asked, "Can we try again tomorrow?" Tomorrow. Not a forever contract, just another step. I nodded. Yes. His smile was small, his eyes were full. Then he touched my wrist lightly, just once, and stepped inside. I stood under the hotel's bright lights until I couldn't see his silhouette anymore. On the way back to my apartment, I checked my phone and found a new message from him. He'd written, "I didn't come back to ask for anything. I came back because you're real." I stared at the words until they blurred. And this time, I didn't delete my feelings to protect myself. I let them stay. The delay had been a doorway, not because it gave us a dramatic romance, but because it forced us to sit long enough beside each other to notice what we'd been ignoring. And when the power flickered, when the truth trembled at the edge of our mouths, we finally chose courage over pretending.